The settlers had a new country, full of new places and geographical features, new animals and plants. They needed words to describe them, and occasionally they turned to the native languages. Skunk was derived from the local language, and squash for the variety of pumpkin grown here. Squaw, meaning young woman, was a local word, as was papoose, a young child. And wigwam was another early borrowing from the local languages. But what's really remarkable is not that these words did enter the English vocabulary, but how few of them there were. For centuries, English had been borrowing words in their thousands from Latin, Danish, French, and every other language it had come into contact with. But here, faced with the richness of an entire continent, the English borrowed words not in thousands, but in handfuls. The writings of the founding fathers here run to thousands of pages, but contain less than a dozen borrowed Indian words. So why are there so few? In a strange new country, the English settlers may have taken great comfort in making the objects around them at least sound familiar. Look at the names they gave the local terrain: Falmouth, Yarmouth, Boston, Cambridge, Billericay, Bedford, Taunton. They were trying to recreate the English shires in the American wilderness. And perhaps there was desperation here, as well as determination. But through language, their own, they would survive, as they had in the old country. So they put a wall between themselves and the native world. In the end, we must conclude that they were here to impose their habits and their language on the land, not to be changed by it. Words, God's good English words, were at the heart of the lives of the settlers here. Improper speech was a crime. Blasphemy, slander, cursing, lying, perjury, railing, reviling, scolding, swearing, threatening, treason, and defying authority were all offences. The colonists were trying to control the language, and this set the pattern for their teaching of English. And as New England grew, this was how they did it, with the New England Primer.
A. In Adam's fall, sinned all. B. Heaven to find the Bible mind. C. Christ crucified for sinners died. D. The deluge drowned the earth around. E. Elijah.
From the very beginning, Americans took immense care over the correct teaching of English. It was taught well and in a way that was highly religious, and this set the tone as English spread. It wasn't all going English's way, though. Other European powers were jostling for influence in the New World. Delaware, where a Swedish settlement had taken root, was conquered in 1655 by the Dutch Admiral Peter Stuyvesant and incorporated into the Dutch New Netherlands. His base, New Amsterdam, was in turn conquered by the British in 1664 and renamed New York. There was rivalry with the French, which turned into war. When it finally ended in 1763, Britain was given sole claim to the east of the continent and took a grip on the north in Canada. Even the Spanish colony of Florida came under British rule. But perhaps the real edge that gave English a stronger presence than the other European languages came not through the gun, but through the ploughshare. The Spanish, on the whole, concentrated on sending armies and priests to the New World and taking gold. The French were interested in sending fur trappers and trading with the natives. It was only the English who continued the spirit of the Pilgrim Fathers and came to stay. Persistence and sheer weight of numbers eventually ensured that English, not Spanish, Dutch or French, would be the language heard from the Atlantic coast to the Appalachian Mountains. But as English spread, it also started to develop a character of its own, to drift away from the language spoken in England. There was already the beginnings of the tomato-tomato problem. In some cases, meaning shifted. The English shop had become an American store. Lumber meant rubbish in the old country. To Americans, lumber was, and still is, cut timber. And haul came to mean to transport in a vehicle, not, as in England, to move by force. American English was also developing its own sound. The first settlers had come from various parts of England, each with its own regional accent. But no single accent dominated. As they talked to each other, the variety very quickly became a blend. To this day, there's only a tiny variation in accents across America compared to Britain, and the further west you go, the more true that becomes. By the middle of the 18th century, the absence of regional pronunciations and dialect words was being noted approvingly by upper-class British visitors, who regarded all such variations as vulgar. In 1764, Lord Gordon wrote, "The propriety of language here surprised me much, the English tongue being spoken by all ranks in a degree of purity and perfection surpassing any but the polite part of London." It's a sentiment that would be repeated again and again, that the Americans didn't just speak good English, they spoke it better than the English themselves.